I notice a lot of the work you do is in that crime genre, which is a genre I am heavily infatuated with, just because of
Hmm.
just because of the suspense and just the thrill of it. The Godfather Part Three, your role as Joey Zaza is really iconic, and I actually enjoyed the re-edited version, The Godfather Coda: The Death of Michael Corleone, that came out a few years ago.
Right.
When you watched it, was there any specific scenes or moments in that film that you were happy to see included?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because the original script was different than the one we ultimately shot. And so, because Robert Duvall was all over the original script. So, in other words, they had hoped that he was going to be do the movie. And so it changed the script somewhat. And I had actually a bit more to do had we shot that version. But when it didn't work out that Robert was did the film, there were in the rewrites, some of that stuff went away. There was some interaction between his character and mine that just never was relived. So that wasn't there. So I kind of remember that specifically. Uh, then beyond that, I mean, every day was always somewhat interesting, as you can imagine, being on the set of such an iconic kind of part of that trio of films. I mean, when I remember first getting to Rome and walking onto the set of or the sound stages of Cinecittà Studios, where Fellini had done all his movies and things like that, to walk on that sound stage. And I remember as I pushed open the sound stage door my first day, the orchestra was rehearsing for the party scene that happens early in the film. And as I pushed open the door, I hear this orchestra playing da 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 da. Da. And I have to remember this was like 1990, and at that point, the other two movies had been out, almost 20 years prior, and those theme songs were played at every kid's, every Italian guy's birthday party and Christmas thing, and any event that had anything to do with the mob or so. That theme was played. But as I pushed that door open and heard it, I thought, I'm not at somebody's birthday party. I'm not at some, Italian festival. This is the deal. This is the real deal. These are these guys practicing to do the number in this third segment of the Godfather films. So that was something that has really always stuck in my mind. Talk about, getting back to your question about, things that were put in there. I mean, that's not exactly, wasn't, it's part of the whole process, part of the whole experience more than like a moment from the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a movie that, like I hear people talk about sometimes like the third movie not being as good as the other two, but I grew up watching well, okay, I was born in 1999, so I didn't grow up when it came out. But when I was
Right,
growing up, I've watched the whole trilogy in order, right? I watched the one,
right.
two, three. But there's still some very iconic scenes in the third. It was also nominated for, I believe, 7 Academy Awards. And
Yeah,
for example, some of my favorite scenes, like even just some lines in the film when Al Pacino goes, "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in." There's that.
right.
There's just
Exactly.
yeah, there's the one where you're talking to Al Pacino and the rest of the families there, and you go, I made you all rich. And he goes, I've asked for little. Good. You won't give, I'll take. Like that's an iconic line too. There's so many,
Right.
even the scene where Andy Garcia's character, Vincent Mancini, Vincent Corleone, on the horse, and there's that festa going on, and you're
Yes.
walking. It's kind of symbolic. Actually, it's kind of sorry. It pays homage to the Don Fanucci scene in Godfather 2,
Right.
with they're
Right.
holding the mother, the
Right.
Mother Mary
Right.
and stuff. So just looking back on that film, what were some of your favorite scenes?
Well, like what you mentioned those things that brought to mind. Like I think of and a lot of people quote that line to me, but I know I have a bella figura, which was that whole the way that I dressed, kind of. I remember I won that award that later at the end of that year they gave out awards for the best dressed gangsters in Hollywood, and I won. Joey Zaza won as the best dressed gangster that year, which was kind of interesting. But I also remember, there was a moment, you know, um, in that same speech you talk about when I'm walking around the table. Um, we did a version. Now you have to understand, all the cameras were hidden behind because it was a big set. It was a giant set in Rome where they built a set. Supposed to be New York, but we were in Rome filming that most of the film. So that set was built, and it was built on a huge turntable, so that way when that scene came with the helicopters and the room vibrated, they were able to kind of do that because the whole soundstage was basically on a platform that they could move. So anyway, so my point being is they were able to shoot 360 degrees within that room because you couldn't see any of the cameras anywhere. Like one camera wouldn't have to see the other camera. So you really couldn't tell you were making a movie. You felt like you were talking to everybody in the room. So there was one, after we had done a couple takes, Coppola said to us, and he's such a wonderful artist and director, he said, look, let's do another take just for fun. It might have even been during the rehearsal process before we even started filming. He said, let's do one where you put the whole thing in your own words. He says, you guys know the scene well enough. Just say what comes to your mind, but trying to keep in the context of what the scene's about. So we did that. And I came around the table and I started to jump into, I mean, my whole idea of Joey Zasa was to make him somewhat, I thought of him as, he's not the smartest guy in the world, but he thinks of himself as like Italian royalty. So he's always going to try to use words that are a little bigger than he can actually handle and maybe do it in a way like he felt a prince of Rome would do back in the day. You know what I mean? But yet I thought there's going to be those moments when he slips out of that because he is who he is. So during that take of the rehearsal where Coppola said, do it in your own words, I happened to come out with the line, yeah, I'd like a little pin from the Pope, talking about the little award that Pacino got, you know. And so so then Coppola says, okay, great, that was a great exercise. Let's go back now. Let's shoot the scene because he figured that's going to help us, whatever it does. It maybe help us in the next take. Well, little did I know that when I went to the premiere of the movie, I go see the film, that scene comes up, and all of a sudden, here I am coming around the table. All of a sudden, I say, yeah, I'd like a little pin from the Pope. And that's what my first time I realized Coppola had the cameras roll on that take, on that rehearsal, and wound up using some of those lines. Because, I mean, in his brilliance, he realized, let them take a shot at it, and there might be something in there, an improv, that is fitting. So that particular line, that's mine. That wasn't Mario
Oh
Puzo's line.
wow.
That's Joe Mantegna saying, "Yeah, I'd like a little pin from the Pope." And there were other instances like that. I realized because later on, when we're doing the parade, the Meucci parade, I had done a movie a couple of years prior with the great. You may be too young to remember him, or you may know him as a film buff, though. The actor Don Amici, and I had done the movie Things Change with Don Amici. Don Amici was a big star in the
Yeah,
30s and
I'm not too
40s.
familiar with that one. No.
Yeah, your parents would be. They'd let you know. Your grandparents will let you know. But he had done a famous movie called Alexander Graham Bell, which was the history of Alexander Graham Bell who invented the telephone, right? So there's a scene before the Meucci parade where all the press is interviewing me. Joey Zaza, what do you think of it? And one guy says to me, and again, Coppola just says, in the press thing, just ad lib whatever you think should be appropriate. So we're doing a rehearsal, and one of the press guys says, hey, Joey Zaza, so what do you think of this Meucci parade? And Meucci supposedly was the guy that Italians feel invented the telephone. That's why we were honoring him. So what I said was, and I said it as just as an improv and as a tip of my hat to my dear friend Don Amici, who I had worked with a couple of years before, who had done the movie Alexander Graham Bell. I said, Meucci is a great Italian who invented the telephone. Don Amici is a great Italian who they think played the guy who invented the telephone. And they all laugh. And I remember then Coppola coming up to me before we shot the scene. He said, keep that line in, because he didn't shoot that rehearsal. He says, keep that line in about Don Amici. I said, great. So I did. And I'll never forget that when the movie opened on Christmas Day that year of 1990, I got a call that evening where I was living in New York, and it was Don Amici, who won the Oscar later in life. And then I did the movie Things Change with him, which was a great film, a David Mamet movie. Anyway, but he says, Joe, I saw the movie today. I was there with my doctor because he was one of his best friends was his doctor. He was he was probably in his 80s then. He said, I have a feeling you had something to do with that line in the movie, And of course I did. So that's a moment that, again, here's this, one of the most anticipated movies certainly of the year that year, and to be able to have had the opportunity to kind of throw in a little something that made it into the film, and also was my homage to a dear, wonderful actor and a great human being, Don, because he died just a couple of years after that. Uh, so that's how that came about. Um, and that was all. And I want to go back to what you said about, because I find this interesting when you said like because being as young as you are and you saw all the three movies together, the fact that you weren't part of that thing 20 years prior when the first movie came out and the second movie came out, I think that did have a lot to do with it, because everybody, people of my age and people of that generation, their expectations were so high, so beyond the stratosphere. That third movie had to be had to be the best thing in the world for them to kind of be satisfied. And so, and I think a lot of expectations, because maybe Duval wasn't in it for whatever reason, and then of course there was some, disruption over the fact that Francis's daughter was in the movie and da 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 da. Da. But I think whenever I would talk to people more like your age, and around that age or even a little older, like at this point, people are more like, today they would be more in their 30s, 40s. They would say to me, some of them even would say, "Oh God, the third one was actually my favorite because it was take place in the 70s, which I could relate to." And I've said, "Really?" And they would say, "Yeah." They go, and then I've started to realize their perception is different. They're seeing all three of them, taking them. They're not going in with this preconception of like, "Oh well, the first two are the two greatest movies ever made, and so this one better be right in there, not the same pocket." You know what I mean? So I'm thinking of somebody who's just seeing them all for the first time. I think they're looking at it a little more objectively, which is in a sense, for as a filmmaker, that's what you hope to do. You can't dictate when a person's going to see your work, but all you can do is just put it out there. But like in your instance, you got to see them all three at the same time, and you're going to make, you still may be able to say, "Oh, I like this one better than that one." But the fact that you can appreciate that third one on a different level than others who perhaps had just been lived with those first two for 20 years, and it changes the perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the way I think about it is this, like everyone has different tastes when they watch things. I know some people that don't even like The Godfather at all, which I think is just
Right.
blasphemy. Because I'm sorry,
Exactly.
it is the best franchise if you really think about it. Because it is a
Yeah.
mix of, it's not just a mob story. It's about family.
No, not at
It's like what
all.
they
It's a family
did it,
story. You're absolutely
family
right.
story. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's
Right.
why the
I
offer
agree.
did a brilliant job at showcasing that when they that Paramount show, the offer, when they showcased the making of it, they did a brilliant job at like telling that story. You know what I mean? So
Right.
um, for me, when I watched The Godfather 3, the only thing I could say was that, and I don't think it's a bad thing, but some people say it, is that Michael Corleone felt different than the others. And I always tell people it was done on purpose. The reason why, I mean, at least the way I interpreted it, why he had a different haircut, he had a different demeanor. It was all because he was trying to just legitimize himself, get back to his family, and at the end of it, he
Yeah.
died like a dog, literally at the
Yeah.
end. There's
Yeah.
and that's
And
what he
as he
said.
should, and also because the original script, he was shot on the steps of the
Yes, yes,
opera house, not
I
the
read about
daughter.
that. Someone said that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember saying that to Francis, saying to him, "Wow, that's very interesting where you changed the ending and made it." I said it's much more tragic. I said, as a father of two daughters, of course, I would rather die than watch my daughter be killed in front of me, knowing that that's I caused that to happen. Do you know what I mean? And what he said to me was interesting. He says, it was important to me to cause my daughter's, meaning his real daughter, my daughter's death on screen, because by doing that, I think he was somewhat superstitious. It avoids that happening ever to her in life. You know what I
Mm,
mean? I think he thought, because you have to understand also he had lost a son very tragically,
yeah.
in a boating accident. And so I think he was somewhat overwhelmed by certain amount of superstition even, and that thing. And I get it, you know what I mean? That whole thing of like, okay, if I actually kill this character on screen, who happens to also be my real life daughter, I've taken away any onus of her dying violently in life. So it's like, wow, okay. And yet also a more effective kind of apropos kind of ending, in the sense of this, you're going to live that life. Things could happen that are going to be more tragic than you could ever imagine.
Yeah, and then
Because you
that
think about it,
yeah.
and Godfather 2, where he basically is destroyed because he knows he was responsible for his brother's death with Fredo. So it was
Yeah, and
almost like payback.
he's living with all these repercussions, and
Right,
that cry on the steps. Oh,
right,
that always sends shivers through my spine. Every time I watch it, I always and then he just lives he lives a long life to an old man. That's his punishment at the end of the day.
right,
You know,
right,
he didn't get
exactly,
killed by mob gangsters. No, he lived a long, tragic life after his daughter's death. That's the main message.
exactly, and justifiably so. That's the and that's the way that was the right way to end it. I think. Yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
absolutely.